The quiet affluence of Chevy Chase, a suburb just outside Washington, D.C., was, for the most part, a shield against the harsh realities of the world. Manicured lawns, stately homes, and a sense of enduring peace define this community. But in the year 2001, that shield shattered, pierced by an act of unimaginable violence that would echo through 2 decades, leaving behind a lingering cloud of suspicion and an aching void. Leslie Prior, a 49-year-old mother and wife, was found dead in her home, her life brutally cut short, leaving those who loved her grappling with a nightmare that refused to yield to understanding. For Leslie's daughter, Lauren, the devastation was absolute. Her mother had been her confidant, her anchor, a vibrant presence whose sudden, violent absence ripped a hole in the fabric of her world. The shock waves of the murder extended far beyond the immediate family, rippling through the close-knit neighborhood, transforming a haven of normalcy into a scene of dark, unanswered questions. The case quickly turned cold, the initial fervor of the investigation slowly fading into the quiet desperation of an unsolved mystery. Years passed, then decades. The memory of Leslie Prior, for many, became entwined with the mystery of her death. But for her daughter, Lauren, and for a select few within the Montgomery County Department of Police, Leslie's story was far from over. Enter Detective Tara Augustine, a seasoned officer whose career trajectory had always pointed toward the most challenging of cases. For Augustine, the cold case unit wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a deeply held ambition to breathe new life into forgotten tragedies. Throughout my whole career, my goal was to get to the cold case unit, Augustine later confided. These are all major crimes. They're either homicides or rapes, and there are ones that haven't been able to be solved. And I like the challenge of trying to look at everything with fresh eyes. In 2022, Augustine's aspiration became reality. She transferred from the dynamic, immediate world of robberies to the painstaking, patient realm of cold cases, joining forces with Detective Allison Dupuy, another veteran whose commitment to justice was equally profound. Together, they formed a formidable partnership, bringing a blend of experience, empathy, and unwavering determination to cases that had long baffled their predecessors. One of the first cases on their desk, a faded file with over 2 decades of dust, was the murder of Leslie Prior. From the moment they picked up Leslie's file, Augustine and Dupuy understood the immense weight of their task. Their initial priority wasn't just to re-examine evidence, but to reconnect with the surviving family. Leslie's daughter, Lauren, became their compass, her enduring grief a constant reminder of the human cost of an unsolved crime. "Doing this job, I want to help people," Dupuy explained. "When you're in the cold case unit, you get to reconnect with families who otherwise probably have been feeling like they've been forgotten by the police department. This connection proved vital, providing not just emotional sustenance, but also context and a deeper understanding of Leslie's life beyond the stark facts of her death." Their initial task was daunting, to strip away 2 decades of assumptions and theories to approach the original case file with a truly fresh perspective. Leslie had been discovered in her upstairs bathroom, the scene grim, the official cause of death determined as blunt force trauma. The initial investigation, as with many cases, had focused on the immediate circle, and the shadow of suspicion had fallen heavily upon Leslie's husband, Carl Sandy Prior, who had passed away in 2017. It was a narrative that had taken root in the community and within the police department, a narrative that Augustin and Dupuy felt compelled to re-evaluate, painstakingly, fact by fact. One of the greatest challenges of cold case work, Augustin knew, was resisting the urge to simply adopt the original viewpoints of the investigators that looked at it before. It required a conscious effort to take a step back and say, well, let's just look at the facts. And the facts, as they were initially presented, had indeed painted a suspicious picture of Sandy. Neighbors, still haunted by the events of 2001, recounted unsettling observations from the night before Leslie was found. One specifically recalled viewing the pressure house, noting that every light was on in the house, an odd detail for the late hours. What struck him as even more unusual was that the drapes were all closed. It was a subtle, yet disquieting departure from the norm for the Prior residents, adding a layer of unease to the unfolding tragedy. Just days after Leslie's murder, Sandy himself had been interviewed on tape, his words preserved in the cold case file for Augustin and Dupuy to scrutinize. He admitted to a strained marriage, citing Leslie's struggles with alcohol. Leslie was an absolute love, beauty when she didn't drink, he told the original investigators, his voice a haunting echo from the past. She would have a lot, and in all honesty, it's one of the reasons why I'd kind of come home late, because it was getting hard to deal with. His candor about their marital difficulties, while understandable, inevitably fueled the flames of suspicion. He depressed about his whereabouts on the evening before Leslie's death, Sandy offered a detailed account of running errands, a seemingly mundane series of tasks that, in hindsight, felt too meticulously constructed. He claimed to have stopped at the dump and visited no fewer than 3 different stores in a quest to find a battery charger. To Detective Dupuy, reviewing the old transcripts, this detailed alibi immediately raised a red flag. It seemed just a little bit suspicious. It seemed like he was trying to create an alibi for himself, she noted, her modern perspective casting a critical eye on events from 2 decades prior. The accumulation of these details, the neighbor's observations, Sandy's admissions of marital discord, his seemingly overly precise alibi, all contributed to the growing unease. And then there was the polygraph test. Sandy had agreed to participate, and he had failed. For the original investigators, this failure would have been a significant piece of circumstantial evidence, further cementing their suspicions. Augustin, however, approached this detail with nuance. Polygraphs, she knew, were tricky. They're an indicator that the person is having a response in their body, a physical response to whatever questions are being asked, she explained. And I can see how he would have failed, because it's a very stressful situation, and the police think that he killed his wife. The pressure alone could trigger a failed result, regardless of guilt. Yet, the fact remained, at the time, it looked damning. As Augustin and Dupuy delved deeper into the original file, they could almost trace the thought process of the investigators who had preceded them. They were trying to find a reason why Sandy was acting so suspiciously, Augustin theorized. Because a lot of his movements, a lot of his reactions, the failed polygraph, they were all mounting up to probable cause. The collective weight of these indicators had created a compelling, albeit circumstantial, case against Sandy Prior. For years, the community and even segments of the police department had quietly believed they knew who was responsible for Leslie's death: the husband. It was a familiar, tragic narrative. But then, nestled within the meticulously preserved records was a single, pivotal piece of evidence that had shattered this tidy theory, transforming a seemingly solvable case into a bewildering cold case that would languish for years. 2 months after Leslie's death, forensic test results had come back. Male DNA had been found under Leslie's fingernails, evidence of a desperate struggle in her final moments. And this DNA was definitively not a match to her husband, Sandy. This revelation was a game-changer, a crucial anomaly that completely dismantled the prevailing theory. It meant that despite all the suspicions, all the circumstantial evidence pointing toward Sandy, he could not have been the perpetrator. Someone else, an unknown male, had struggled with Leslie in her last moments, leaving behind his biological signature. The case, which had seemed so close to resolution, suddenly became opaque, leading investigators down a blind alley. The truth, it turned out, was far more complex and infinitely more elusive than anyone had initially imagined. Leslie Prayer's murder, with this new DNA evidence, retreated into the shadows, joining the ranks of truly cold cases, waiting for a breakthrough that would not come for nearly 2.5 decades. The family, particularly Lauren, was left with the crushing knowledge that the man they had suspected was innocent, but the real killer remained free, an invisible specter haunting their lives. The initial mystery had only deepened, a cruel twist of fate that ensured the shadow of suspicion would not lift, but merely shift, until a new generation of detectives, armed with unprecedented technology, could finally shed light on the darkness. For over 2 decades, the brutal murder of Leslie Pryor remained an open wound, a cold case that haunted the Montgomery County Department of Police and, most agonizingly, Leslie's daughter, Lauren. The initial investigation, fraught with the emotional turmoil surrounding Leslie's estranged husband, Sandy, had ultimately stalled. Despite the lingering suspicions that had unjustly clouded Sandy's name for years, one piece of irrefutable evidence offered a different truth. Male DNA found beneath Leslie's fingernails that did not belong to him. This crucial detail, a biological whisper from the crime scene, had been a beacon of hope, but one that current technology couldn't fully illuminate. The file, thick with interviews, reports, and forensic analyses, had gathered dust, a testament to the limitations of the past. But time, while a thief of memory, also brings innovation, and the dawn of new forensic science was about to break through the 23-year-old darkness. In 2022, Detective Tara Augustin's long-held ambition was realized when she finally transferred to the Cold Case Unit. Her entire career had been a focused journey toward these unsolved puzzles, these forgotten victims whose voices she was determined to amplify. Joining forces with veteran officer Detective Allison Dupuy, Augustin brought not just fresh eyes, but an unshakable belief in the power of perseverance. The pair, now assigned to Leslie Pryor's 2001 murder, knew their mission extended beyond justice. It was about honoring Leslie's memory and providing peace to Lauren, who had endured a lifetime under the shadow of suspicion surrounding her father. From the outset, maintaining a strong connection with Lauren was paramount, a commitment to ensuring she felt seen and heard, not forgotten by a system that had, for so long, been unable to deliver answers. Their task began with a painstaking re-examination of the original case file. A thick stack of reports, photographs, and witness statements that painted a vivid, yet incomplete, picture of that tragic day. Leslie had been found in her upstairs bathroom, the autopsy confirming blunt force trauma as the cause of death. Augustin and Dupuy made a conscious decision to shed any preconceived notions, to approach the evidence with a truly objective lens. As Augustin often articulated, you have to take a step back and say, let's just look at the facts. This was particularly critical given the historical focus on Sandy Prieur. The neighbors' reports of unusual activity at the Prazier home, every light on, drapes drawn, and Sandy's strained marriage and his somewhat suspicious alibi for the night of the murder, coupled with a failed polygraph test, had all painted a picture that had led previous investigators down a path away from the true killer. While Augustin acknowledged the stress of a polygraph could explain Sandy's results, it was the DNA that truly stood as a silent, unwavering counter-narrative. The male DNA under Leslie's fingernails, unequivocally not Sandy's, was the linchpin, the singular piece of evidence that demanded a new direction. The advancements in forensic genetic DNA technology provided that direction. This burgeoning field, genetic genealogy, was revolutionizing cold case investigations. Unlike traditional DNA databases like CODIS, which require a direct match to a convicted offender or arrestee, genetic genealogy cast a wider net. It involved comparing unknown DNA samples to publicly accessible genetic databases, typically those used by individuals seeking to uncover their family history. The process could yield a list of profiles that had a certain degree of relatedness to the suspect's DNA profile, ranging from close relatives to very distant cousins. Sometimes it can be thousands of people, Augustine explained, and it can be a very, very distant relationship. It was a monumental undertaking, but one that offered the most promising avenue for justice. The detectives secured an enhanced DNA profile from Othram, a leading genetic genealogy company. With this refined data, Augustin and Dupuy embarked on a meticulous, arduous journey into the labyrinth of family trees. For a year and a half, their days were consumed by analyzing vast volumes of low-match DNA results, patiently tracing genealogical lines, cross-referencing public records, and piecing together ancestral puzzles. It was a painstaking process, often yielding dead ends, demanding an almost unimaginable level of dedication and forensic detective work, but their resolve never wavered. They started with existing American family trees, sifting through countless branches, each name a potential connection, each connection a step closer to Leslie's killer. Then, a flicker of light in the genealogical darkness. The highest DNA match was found linked to a family line in Romania. It was an unexpected twist, a transatlantic thread in their complex tapestry, and it ignited a surge of curiosity. In June 2024, Augustine immersed herself in publicly available records and articles pertaining to this newfound Romanian family line. As she delved deeper, a name surfaced that resonated with a chilling familiarity: Gligor. It was a name, distinctive and unforgettable, that she vaguely remembered from the original, decades-old case file. A jolt of adrenaline coursed through her. Augustine immediately retrieved the original reports, her fingers trembling slightly as she combed through the aging documents. There it was, the name Gligor, connected to Eugene Gligor, Leslie's daughter's high school boyfriend. The revelation was staggering. Using the intricate family trees they had painstakingly constructed, the detectives quickly established the familial link. Eugene Gligor was a first cousin, twice removed from the genetic genealogy match found in Romania. The connection was undeniable, yet still indirect, presenting the next hurdle. Eugene Gligor's DNA had never been entered into any law enforcement database like CODIS, meaning they couldn't simply run a direct comparison. They needed a fresh sample. The hunt was now precise, focused, and urgent. Augustin and Dupois meticulously planned their next move. A week later, leveraging their network and expertise, they enlisted the discreet assistance of customs officials at Dulles Airport. Eugene Gligor, unaware of the net closing around him, was observed taking a sip from a water bottle. Once discarded, the bottle was swiftly and covertly collected, a seemingly innocuous item now holding the key to unlocking a 23-year-old mystery. The sample was rushed to the lab, and the detectives held their breath, the culmination of years of tireless work resting on these results. Within a week, the confirmation arrived. The DNA from the discarded water bottle was a definitive match to the male DNA found under Leslie Preer's fingernails. Eugene Gligor was Leslie's killer. The relief and vindication were immense, but there was no time for celebration. The detectives swiftly prepared their arrest warrants, coordinating with the U.S. federal marshals. The arrest was executed with precision. Gligor was apprehended at his apartment in Washington, D.C., then extradited to Maryland and brought to Montgomery County to face charges in connection with Leslie's murder. During initial interrogations with Augustin and Dupuy, Gligor vehemently denied any involvement in the case, maintaining his innocence in the face of overwhelming genetic evidence. But the detectives, armed with the truth and the unwavering power of science, knew better. Confronted with the undeniable proof, the weight of his guilt eventually became too heavy to bear. In May 2024, Eugene Gligor pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, bringing a long-awaited measure of justice. Perhaps the most profoundly gratifying aspect of this exhaustive investigation for detectives Augustin and Dupuy was the moment of complete vindication for Carl Sandy Preer. For over 2 decades, he had lived under a cloud of suspicion, silently bearing the unspoken accusations of a community and the crushing weight of his wife's unsolved murder. The definitive identification of Eugene Gligor cleared Sandy's name entirely, lifting an unimaginable burden. For Lauren, Leslie's daughter, this was more than just an arrest. It was a profound sense of closure, the return of her mother's dignity, and the healing of a family wound that had festered for too long. Augustin recalled the deep bond they formed with the Preer family over the years of the investigation, and the immense reward of being able to tell them, "We got the guy, and we didn't forget about Leslie." The hunt was over. Justice, at long last, had found its mark. The electrifying confirmation that Eugene Gligor's DNA was a definitive match to the sample found beneath Leslie Preer's fingernails reverberated through the Montgomery County Cold Case Unit. It was the moment detectives Augustin and Dupuy had relentlessly pursued for a year and a half. The intricate family trees, the countless hours poring over public records, the leap of faith in a distant Romanian genetic link, all culminating in this undeniable truth. The sterile lab report wasn't just paper, it was justice finally breathing, a 23-year-old whisper, now a roaring confession. There was a palpable shift in the air. a transition from patient, meticulous investigation to swift, decisive action. The warrants were drawn up with an urgency that belied the 2 decades of waiting. Every detail was double-checked, every legal requirement met. This wasn't just an arrest. It was the final act in a drama that had haunted a family and a community for far too long. U.S. Federal marshals, with their quiet efficiency and formidable presence, were dispatched to Gligor's apartment in Washington, D.C. The knock on his door, the sudden confrontation, the realization that his past had finally caught up, it must have been a seismic shock for a man who had lived for over 2 decades under the radar of justice. He was taken into custody. Hoi hope. He was taken into custody, the initial shock giving way to a silent, stone-faced defiance, and then extradited to Maryland, brought back to the very county where, a lifetime ago, he had committed a heinous crime. Back in the interrogation room at the Montgomery County Department of Police, the air crackled with a different kind of tension. Detectives Augustin and Dupuy sat across from Eugene Gligor, the man who had robbed Leslie Prier of her life and her family of peace. The sterile room, designed for raw confessions and painful truths, now held the weight of a quarter-century of unanswered questions. Gligor, initially, maintained a steadfast denial. His eyes, though wary, met theirs with an unnerving calm, his voice steady as he refuted any involvement, feigning ignorance of the events of that night in 2001. But Augustin and Dupuy were seasoned investigators. They had meticulously built their case, piece by painstaking piece, and they held the trump card, the irrefutable DNA evidence. They laid out the facts calmly and methodically, showing him the unassailable connection, the genetic signature that linked him directly to Leslie Prier, found in a place that left no room for coincidence or mistake. Under her fingernails, a testament to her desperate final struggle. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the unspoken acknowledgement of his cornered reality. The detectives had seen this before, the initial bravado, the gradual erosion under the weight of undeniable truth. Months passed, filled with legal maneuverings, but the evidence was overwhelming. Facing the grim certainty of conviction, Eugene Gligor, in May 2024, entered a plea of guilty to second-degree murder. The news, though expected by the prosecution, sent a wave of complex emotions through Leslie Prier's family, particularly her daughter, Lauren. For years, a heavy cloud of suspicion had hung over her late father, Carl Sandy Prier. Lauren had endured the agonizing whispers, the sideways glances, the painful speculation that her own father might have been responsible for her mother's brutal death. Now, with Gligor's confession, that cloud lifted, revealing the stark truth, and, with it, a profound sense of relief. It wasn't just about finding the killer. It was about reclaiming her father's memory, about validating the love she had for both her parents. We didn't forget about Leslie, Detective Augustine had promised, and with Gligor's plea, that promise was fulfilled, bringing a sense of closure that Lauren had thought might never come. The bond forced between Lauren and the detectives over the long years of the renewed investigation deepened. They had become more than just law enforcement officers. They were allies, carrying the torch of Leslie's memory until justice could be served. The day of sentencing, August 28, 2025, arrived with a mix of solemnity and anticipation at the Montgomery County Circuit Courthouse in Rockville, Maryland. The courtroom was hushed, the benches filled with Leslie's family, members of the community, and the two detectives whose persistence had brought everyone there. Eugene Gligor, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, stood before Judge David Lease, his face devoid of the earlier defiance, now etched with a weary resignation. When it was his turn to speak, his voice was low, almost a murmur, as he offered an explanation that felt hollow after decades of silence. He claimed blackouts due to drug and alcohol use at the time of the murder. "I vaguely remember leaving the prayer house in the morning, but the rest is a blur," Gligor stated, his words lacking the specific details so desperately sought by Leslie's loved ones. "I know Lauren and Leslie's family want to know why I was there and what happened. I'm sorry, I'm unable to remember and provide an explanation." The apology, if it could be called that, landed heavily, leaving a bitter taste for those who had waited so long for answers, for a shred of remorse or understanding that might explain such a senseless act. The prosecutors, however, were quick to counter this vague assertion of memory loss. In their sentencing memorandum, they painted a starkly different picture, arguing that Gligor's claims were an evasion, a final act of cowardice. "This is a crime without a motive that the defendant is willing to admit," they asserted, their voices firm, cutting through the defendant's murky recollections. "The defendant is unwilling to admit his motive and the full extent of his horrific conduct." The court was asked to consider not just the act, but the lingering pain, the decades of uncertainty, the profound impact on a family and a community. Judge David Lease, after hearing the arguments, delivered his sentence.
Đọc với dòng kể chuyện bí ẩn, hồi hộp. The weight of the court's authority settled upon Gligor as he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. It was a moment of profound significance, the legal system's final pronouncement on a crime that had defied resolution for so long. Though Gligor subsequently filed a motion asking the court to reconsider his sentence, for Leslie's family, the sentence, for now, represented a tangible end to their long ordeal. Outside the courthouse, Detective Augustin stood, reflecting on the arduous journey. The sun, perhaps, felt a little brighter, the air a little lighter. "Today's a good day," she acknowledged, a quiet triumph in her voice. Yet she understood the enduring grief. It's bittersweet because the family has lost someone that was really great and important to them. But it's good to see the hard work has finally paid off. Her words encapsulated the complex emotions of justice, the satisfaction of a case closed, the professional pride in solving the unsolvable, but always shadowed by the irreversible tragedy that necessitated their work. For Leslie Prier, justice had finally arrived, carried by the fresh eyes of two dedicated detectives and the silent, undeniable truth etched in a single strand of DNA.